This is why cash is king. Whoever said money doesn't buy happiness doesn't fucking have it. That is one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite films called Boiler Room. And it is so relevant if you are in property because cash is always king. Now, a lot of you who will be watching this would have watched other YouTubers and other people providing content who are involved in property, right through to everyone in the UK, to some of the bigger names overseas in America. And a lot of these guys, the Grant Cardones and all of those sorts of peoples, will say cash is trash, don't own your own home, and all of this absolute nonsense. But here is why I think cash is always going to be king. So let's look at some of the arguments as to why you shouldn't hold cash that any one of these gurus will give you. And it's things like money in the bank is losing money, and they aren't necessarily wrong. There is an argument that if you've got money in the bank and it sits there for a long period of time, it gets eaten away by inflation. The cost of living goes up every single year. And if you aren't earning any interest or a very good interest rate on that money, over time, it will get you a lot less if you were to take it out and spend it. The argument can be much broader if you compare it to what you can buy. Take property for a really good example. What you could buy for 100,000 20 years ago or even 30 years ago wouldn't get you anywhere near that in today's money. But 100,000 buying things like penny sweets or PlayStations or clothes might be quite similar to what it would get you 20, 30 years ago as opposed to today. So the rate of inflation is just one argument. But when you take it down another level and you start talking about assets like gold and property, the argument gets even more reinforced. But I'm going to give you a very good reason why you shouldn't just go and empty your bank accounts today and go and quickly spend it buying as many assets as physically possible. And it goes back to the old saying, turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. And it doesn't matter how many assets you've got. And it doesn't matter how much equity you've got. And it doesn't matter how many piles of gold you've got locked away in your safe at home. If you do not have cash when you need it, you run the risk of creating a domino effect which could ripple across your whole sector of wealth and get you to a point where you could potentially lose everything. Now, I have been in a position where I desperately needed cash. Fortunately, it hasn't been any time recently. I'm talking back in the 2008 crisis, credit crunch crisis. Now, I was really lucky that I hadn't got into property because I literally wasn't old enough many years before that. Had I have just got into property 3 or 4 years prior to this, I may have got to a point or a portfolio size which meant my deck of cards came falling down and I went bankrupt. And I did come very, very close. I was left with a very small portfolio which was in negative equity. That means I couldn't sell the properties and clear the debt that was on the property, let alone profit I once had in these deals. And to add insult to injury, my monthly mortgage payments were higher than the rent that I had coming in. So I literally had to get a job just to pay the mortgage monthly payments, let alone making any profit. And I couldn't afford to sell them because the negative balance would wipe me out completely. And it's this period in my life where I realized that the one time when you need to borrow money because you don't have any is pretty much one of the most impossible things that you can try and do. Now, when you've got money and things are going really well and the economy is booming, people, lenders, banks, they're throwing money at you to do deals and for you to take large sums of cash. But when we go into a credit crunch, when we go into an economy shift or a downturn or a recession, or you as an individual are scratching around trying to find cash, it becomes almost impossible to borrow it. And this lesson is why I am doing this video, and I personally hold cash, because I know only too well how difficult it is when you need it to get it. And more importantly, I know how quickly you can find yourself in a position where you need cash very, very quickly. Those of you who haven't been through this for whatever reason may not resonate with this point, but I do speak from the heart where I say it is near on impossible. And if you don't start holding cash, you will find yourself, when the ground underneath you becomes a little bit slippery, slipping and falling completely on your arse without anyone to help you up. So let's get into this question. And how much should you be holding? Unfortunately, there is no one size fits all. There is no one golden rule for everyone to follow. I've heard people talking about holding £1 million in cash, which would see them through 6 months if they didn't collect any rent and they had to make all their monthly mortgage payments and pay their builders on the current projects. I've heard some people say that they're only going to hold literally £10,000 cash, regardless of their size of their portfolio, because they want the cash out there doing more for them in multiple markets. And I'm not saying either of those two are right or wrong. And I'm not gonna tell you to follow what I do as a strategy, because everyone is so different. And I have definitely become more risk averse in my later years. Go back to 8 years ago when I was really getting started in property. I would literally remortgage my own home up to the maximum I could to pull as much money as I could out to buy another property. And I remember managing the completion dates to fall in line with when the mortgage payment would come in, just so I had enough money to pay for that one extra monthly mortgage payment before the tenants would move in. That's how tight I think I manage things. I'm talking about hundreds of pounds here, but when you have no money in your bank account, that is a massive, massive hurdle to overcome. But these days, I am far more risk averse, because I've seen how quickly, even in the last sort of 6 to 8 years, how quickly difficult things can arise. I've had mortgage lenders write to me and call loans in. Loans on portfolios in excess of 1.5 million. And you have to go and refinance. And if you can't refinance, you either lose those properties or you have to stump up the cash. So having cash ready is key. Now, when you have cash in the bank account, in a pretty much high street bank account, you're earning next to no interest. You might be earning 0.1, 0.2, 0.5% if you're really, really lucky. If you've got a Santander account, you might be clutching on to, I think it's about 1% up to 20k balance. Now, for me, there is a risk of holding cash, and that is the £85,000 threshold where the UK government protects your money in a bank. And to make this really clear, it's one person, one amount in a single bank. That means if I have an account in HSBC and that has £85,000 in it, but then I have another account, which is a savings account, I'm not protected for over that amount. And then there's the big question, why do you do it? So personally, having cash in the bank account for me helps me sleep at night. And as I de-risk my own portfolio and my own position by paying down debt, having no mortgage, it does become a little bit easier. But there are big working capital reasons why I tend to hold cash. And that is because of scenarios that do still happen, and it has literally just happened to me in the last week. So I have talked about the buy, refurbish, refinance strategy and how you can use different products to make this process work really well for you. And that tends to involve a bridging loan to buy and then refinance and within 6 months with the same lender. However, on complicated purchases or on auction purchases, things don't always go that smoothly. Now, I had a catalogue of small issues all pile up on this one purchase for me. The valuation was instructed late, 2 weeks after the auction purchase. The valuation report didn't come back in on time, and no one really chased it apart from me and the broker. No one at the lender took hold of it. Then we had some issues with the survey itself. We also had some issues with the title. We also had some issues with the process and the time of year with the lender. It was August, people are on holiday, things get left on desks. When you're trying to complete within 28 days, every day counts. So when you're losing literally a week at a time, it becomes really, really stressful. There are processes when you buy at auction you have to follow, and that is to complete on the certain time frame, or you are served something called notice, which means if you don't complete after the notice is served, you run the risk of losing your deposit and the deal. And I'm talking about a deal which is one of, if not the best deal I think I've ever come across. And it not only was an auction purchase, it was an on-market deal. And I'm gonna do a video about this property, about the bullshit of off-market deals and everyone else who talks about them and why they talk about them in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out for that. But this property, which was an absolute golden goose that I found, I ran the risk of losing it because the lender and all of the other fundamentals weren't quite clicking into place. But because I hold cash in various locations, in various accounts, I was able to make a decision, take a view that I needed to start making some moves to bring the cash together to make this purchase happen without a lender. And even though it's something I haven't done for a very long time, you realize that you're not earning a great amount of money whilst this emergency fund, this safety net, is sat in these various locations. But the deal that I would use this cash for is worth way more interest, way more risk returns in crypto, way more than Forex trading and all of that other waffle and all of that other murky waters of getting returns on money instead of leaving it in the bank. And that is, I believe, the biggest reason why you should hold cash, large amounts of cash in the bank account. And it's also another reason that if you don't have cash, you need to be thinking very, very carefully about the types of deals that you want to be doing and the types of risks that you be taking. 8 years ago, it was a very different ball game. I was really growing. I was starting from the bottom up, and I was literally trying to squeeze every single penny out of every single corner that I could think of. But when you have a larger portfolio, you have a different element of risks. You have a different element of commitment, and that needs a larger safety net, or a safety net to begin with. Rent-to-rent deals, lease options, these sorts of things. It always makes me really worried when people come to do business in this sector when they don't have cash, because when something goes wrong, one, they have no way of rectifying it. And two, if you have to bring a claim against these individuals for breaching contracts or doing damage, they tend to not even have any money to repay you. So think very, very carefully. It is also another underlying message where no money down deals, you don't need money to get into property, is a little bit murky. There are ways of doing no money down deals, and there are ways of entering the property investing world, if you want to call it that, with next to no money through some of the strategies I mentioned earlier. But having no money as a long-term strategy is a recipe for disaster. And you'll find yourself in the position where many people are today, buying very large deals, doing very large planning gains, all to be in a position where they can't even complete on the purchases because they don't have the financial backing or cash to make the deals come to fruition when they are let down. And there aren't many guarantees in property, but one is you will find yourself being let down time and time again. So look, that's a really quick fire video from me as to why cash is king. And I do think some of the people who tell you cash is trash tends to be the people who are talking and not walking the walk. But that's it from me. Hope you found the content rich. I'll catch you all on the next video.